London, home to over 7 million people. Through its heart runs the River Thames. Going east, it stretches nearly 40 miles. But just before reaching the ocean, it passes a great menace in the depths. An American wreck from World War II. Loaded with 3,000 tons of ordnance, it could blow at any time. 250,000 people in danger. The explosion could be triggered by a terrorist attack, simple accident, or collision. A whole community is at risk. But can anything stop the countdown? All seems calm now.
But lurking beside me, ticking away, is a time bomb. I'm Mykel Hawke.
With over a decade's service behind enemy lines, Mike's seen action around the globe with the elite Green Berets. But could this be mission impossible?
This time bomb is the SS Richard Montgomery, an American supply ship from World War II.
Below those masts lie a rusting hulk and over 13,000 bombs. Today, the wreck is such a hazard that it's illegal to go within 200 yards of it. If you could follow the masts down to the ocean floor, this is what you would find. A Liberty ship that's been decaying for decades. Over 440 feet long, her bridge and superstructure have long since washed away. When she sank, she split in two, leaving her forward holds filled with nearly 3,000 tons of ordnance. This is a devastating variety of munitions, a host of fragmentation, armor-piercing, and assorted other bombs, as well as a deadly chemical weapon. And it's all live. The Montgomery sank in 1944 after accidentally running aground. Her loss deprived the Allied war machine of her desperately needed cargo. Right at the height of the bitterly fought battle for Europe.
These buoys mark an exclusion zone around the site. It's kept under 24-hour surveillance and it's a no-go area. Obviously, the authorities think it's dangerous, but how dangerous is it?
According to the official risk assessment from 2000, any explosion could throw missiles up to 2.5 miles away, cause serious injury 4 miles away, and create up to $2 billion worth of damage. The 33,000 citizens of Sheerness are most at risk. They live and work just over 2 miles from the Montgomery. But also within the danger zone are an oil-fired power plant and a liquefied natural gas refinery. Here in Sheerness, in the shadow of the wreck, bomb disposal engineer Dr. Sidney Alford explains the potential risks.
It will cause an enormous amount of damage. There will be quite a significant seismic shock, and I expect a lot of these buildings will have to be rebuilt.
He's made a business out of knowing the destructive power of old bombs.
Sidney, why not just leave well enough alone?
I feel very strongly that the wreck should be cleared. We owe it to future generations to get rid of it. It should have been done decades ago.
So what happens to a wreck and her cargo after being underwater for over 60 years? No one can dive on the Montgomery because it's illegal, restricted, and downright dangerous. But we can get a sense of her likely condition off another part of the British coast. This is the James Egan Lane, a sister ship with the same design as the Montgomery. Torpedoed by a U-boat in 1945, she's rested at a similar depth for the same period, and so her condition may be comparable. She certainly seems fragile. Her hull has rusted away, her superstructure is gone, and now she is more of a skeleton than a ship. This is what's left of her holds. On the Montgomery, they are filled with bombs. And the masts on the Lane collapsed years ago.
That current is very strong. That thing is a mess. Yeah, you can just break chunks right off of it. It's a mess.
If that's any indication of the condition of the Montgomery, she won't last long. So why has the deteriorating wreck of the Montgomery, full of all those bombs, been left ticking for over 6 decades?
The official view is that it's safer to do nothing than it is to do something. That's because any intervention is very likely to cause detonation.
Over 30 years ago, the British government's own military scientists warned that some of the bombs are liable to explode as a result of even quite mild impacts, and if one were to explode, it would in all probability set off the whole cargo. So that rules out any salvage attempt. Such a hazard obviously requires a close watch, so the wreck is surveyed, sometimes every year, sometimes every other year.
Their state-of-the-art forensic archaeological equipment is safe, fast, and very accurate.
This odd-looking piece of equipment lowers a sonar scanner deep into the water. The sonar head generates sound waves as it passes over the wreck. These create millions of reference points that map the hulk to within half an inch of accuracy. A computer then models the data to create a detailed three-dimensional image of the Montgomery. Martin Dean, a maritime archaeologist, leads the current survey team.
What is your mandate regarding assessing the bombs for your next survey?
Well, it's not part of our job to assess the condition of the bombs. All we're doing is looking at the ship itself, the hull of the ship, and its contents.
So no one really knows or has assessed the state of the bombs. But the surveys have revealed something, a crack in the hull beside the munitions. Once tiny, it's steadily getting bigger. Behind it is the largest hold with the most ordnance. If the hull gives way, as it has on the Lane, the bombs would fall out with possibly devastating consequences. Overlooking the wreck from shore, the Sheerness Port Authority provide the only other action that is taken. They monitor the exclusion zone, but there's no rapid reaction force or warship nearby to stop any intrusions. They can only watch, wonder at the condition of the bombs, and at what might happen if they ever explode.
So maybe we can shed some light on this time bomb. We've assembled a crack team of scientists and technicians to analyze the triggers, the explosions, and the resulting devastation.
With the help of leading U.S. research facilities, we're going to undertake unique scientific tests. and conduct explosive experiments to determine the scale of the threat. Coming up, creating the time bomb. Just how did it get there? You are watching Time Bomb on the History Channel. For over 60 years, this American wreck has been rusting away. It's filled with 3,000 tons of bombs and is called the SS Richard Montgomery. But how did this U.S. Liberty ship end up threatening a British town? In Baltimore, Maryland, there's something that could lead to some answers.
This is the SS John W. Brown, a U.S. Liberty ship. They were all pretty much made the same, but unlike the Montgomery, the Brown is not 40 foot below water.
This is what the Montgomery would have looked like before she was beached. Built to the same design, all Liberty ships were over 400 feet long, about half the size of the Titanic, with a cargo capacity of 9,000 tons. Their great engines propelled them at a steady but vulnerable 11 knots. Richard Montgomery was an Irish general killed fighting in the American Revolution under George Washington. His namesake started life in Jacksonville, Florida in July 1943. She was just one of over 2,700 mass-produced Liberty ships. Each was built in about 50 days. They fueled the Allied war machine, carrying everything from guns to grain, men to medicine, and tents to tanks. Or in the Montgomery's forward holds alone, over 13,000 munitions containing 1,400 tons of explosives. Around 5,000 general-purpose bombs, more than 4,000 semi-armor piercing rounds, nearly 3,000 fragmentation and cluster bombs, and perhaps most deadly of all, 70 tons of white phosphorus. Its destination, Utah Beach, Normandy. It was August 1944, 2 months after D-Day. Europe's future hung in the balance as the Allies struggled to liberate France. For one 17-year-old New Yorker, the Montgomery's voyage would be his first in service, and almost his last.
So right here is where you slept. This was your bunk, your room.
Oh, yes, it was comfortable. There were 2 of us in this room.
What happened that morning?
While I was taking a shower, I hear a loud bang. Went outside on the deck. I noticed a crack in the ship, running from the port side all the way to the starboard side. That crack continued to the waterline.
The Montgomery had run aground. The rapidly falling tide left her on the bottom and split in 2. Most of the crew abandoned ship, but as a signaler, Lenny had to remain behind.
I was petrified. We really thought it was the end for us because we were loaded from stem to stern with bombs.
But Lenny's ordnance never reached the U.S. Army Air Force, where it would have played a crucial role in the fighting. The staple weapon of the Allied Air Forces was the GP, or General Purpose Bomb, and these formed most of the bombs on the Montgomery. Military historian Joe Rayner explains the role of the GP.
General purpose bombs are for demolition effect. Blow out the foundations of a building or take out a dock or a pier.
I've seen a 1,000-pound bomb take out a 5-story concrete structure.
Yeah.
Just devastated.
Yeah, these bombs were devastating. Even a near miss could do serious damage.
In all, the Montgomery carried enough bombs to fully load 2,000 B-17 Flying Fortresses. And it's not all raw explosive power. Each of these 1,400 rounds contains 100 pounds of a noxious chemical agent.
Tell me about this white phosphorus.
It's good for creating a smoke screen, but also has the side effects of suffocating any nearby troops and also sometimes causing really horrible burns.
Today, most countries ban the use of white phosphorus in combat. However, another part of the Montgomery's cargo proved the most effective on the battlefield: the combination of thousands of cluster and fragmentation bombs.
When this explodes, it breaks up into 800 to 1,200 fragments, each fragment about the same heft as a .30 caliber bullet. Anybody within 165 feet of one of these exploding is going to be a casualty.
That's unleashing serious fury right there.
Back in 1944, the Montgomery's remaining crew abandoned the slowly sinking ship. Days later, a salvage team clambered on board to unload the cargo.
Those brave fellas definitely earned their pay. Not only did they unload bombs from a sinking ship, but they did it while under attack. Her cargo was so important that German bombers tried to blow her up, and they sunk 4 armed trawlers trying to defend her.
The salvage team survived and removed the bombs from the rear holds. But then she sank with her forward holds still full, loaded with 1,400 tons of explosives. That's the same as in 3,000 cruise missiles, all aimed at one spot. Coming up, a demonstration of the power of all those munitions on this time bomb. You are watching Time Bomb on the History Channel. A time bomb from World War II is sitting in the River Thames, and thousands of people are at risk. It's a U.S. wreck called the SS Richard Montgomery, and it's filled with tons of munitions. But what other hazards lurk underwater? Do they still pose a real danger, and what damage could they cause? Here at Texas Tech University, specialist engineers may help provide some answers.
The explosives aboard the Montgomery are primarily TNT-based. Are those bombs still dangerous?
There's only one way to find out. Let's see if it'll detonate. I have here an example of circa World War II TNT that was machined from a larger block. We're going to take this TNT and just set it on this plank so that when we close the door, it'll be centered inside this chamber and try and detonate it.
This blast chamber is used to test explosives and can help determine if our vintage sample is live and dangerous.
Jerry, you slide dog. Did you expect that?
I did. All of the research in the U.S. shows that TNT is stable for many, many years.
Then the bombs on the Montgomery are still very deadly.
As viable as the day they were manufactured. Yep.
This confirms the British assessment that the munitions are probably in first-class condition and retain their explosive power.
High explosives isn't the only deadly cargo aboard our vessel. This is white phosphorus. Water makes it inert, but air makes it angry. Very, very angry.
If the Montgomery blew up, hundreds of phosphorus bombs could be exposed to the atmosphere with deadly consequences.
It generates an intense amount of heat, and it keeps feeding on itself until there's no phosphorus left. The vapors that are produced by the reaction of phosphorus with oxygen, that white plume of smoke itself is toxic by inhalation.
What would happen if white phosphorus landed on flesh?
Now, it's particularly nasty because it'll burn right through the skin, and it'll keep going and burn through to the bone.
Each of these 1,400 bombs contains 100 pounds of phosphorus.
This is seriously nasty, dangerous stuff.
A lot of heat, toxicity from the vapors, and the possibility of burning through skin.
Can we set some off?
Sure. We'll set some off inside this fume hood. It won't go off immediately, but once it does, I think you'll find out why this stuff is so dangerous.
How much is this relative to one bomb on the Montgomery?
This is about 1/20,000th of the amount that's in a single bomb on the Montgomery.
And in all, the Montgomery contains nearly 30 million times that amount of phosphorus.
This catalog of chaos just keeps getting worse and worse. But what are the chances of it actually going off? After all, for over 60 years, she's been sitting there safely so far.
Most bombs are built with thick, watertight casings. But during mass war production, the explosives often got mixed with impurities. Over time, these can react to force open the casing of a bomb. This makes it highly unstable and vulnerable to even slight knocks. And to make matters worse, we've discovered some of the Montgomery's bombs are already fused. The fuse sets the bomb off and is triggered by a highly explosive chemical. But over time, this chemical can react with the metal itself to become even more volatile, susceptible to even minor movement. British military scientists have also reported that the fuses are liable to sensitization and could explode after quite mild impacts. They conclude that it would only take one to set off all the rest. There are several potential triggers that could cause the vibrations needed to set off the bombs. Collapse, corrosion, or collision. And there have already been several near misses.
Our lab tests have clearly shown that the bombs are live, could be unstable, and have many potential triggers. But then what happens? Now for my favorite part. Let's blow some stuff up and find out. Here we are at the time bomb test site in the middle of the Texas desert, working with the Lubbock County Sheriff's Bomb Squad and scientists from Texas Tech University. We're going to see what would happen if the Montgomery ever explodes.
That was only 5 pounds of explosive, and it shredded that car. On the Montgomery, there's over 500,000 times that amount of TNT.
But of course, the key feature of the Montgomery is that it's all underwater.
And that will shape the initial nature of the explosion.
Fire!
Even this 3-foot test tank creates a 150-foot plume, and that's only 1/3 of a pound charge. The Montgomery has 10 million times more bang, as much as a small nuclear weapon. Dr. Brandon Weeks has spent his career studying the nature of explosions.
Wow, Brandon, tell me, what kind of blast effects just happened right here?
When this explosive detonates underwater, it's going to create a giant bubble of hot gases.
Okay.
It's going to expand too far. And as it expands too far, it'll collapse and expand and collapse, and it's called cavitation.
So it's kind of like when I was a medic and they taught us about wound ballistics. A high-velocity round going through an organ actually causes it to expand and tear it apart before it collapses back.
It's very similar, and you can see the damage that's caused at the bottom of this tank. When that bubble reaches the surface of the water, it'll create that large water jet that we just saw. It'll be up to 10,000 feet.
What kind of tidal wave would you expect from the Montgomery exploding?
Well, initially, right around the explosion, the wave would be pretty large. There was a weapon set off that was 10 times bigger than Montgomery, and right around the explosive, it created about a 100-foot tidal wave. But after about 2 to 3 miles, it's only about 7 to 10 feet.
After dispersing the water, all that energy escapes as a shock wave.
Now that round was moving quick, fast, and in a hurry. But believe it or not, the shock wave leaving the Montgomery would be traveling at twice that speed.
This shock wave would set off at over 7,000 yards per second, or more than 15,000 miles per hour. The huge pressure creates a wall of compressed air, and the next thing under threat from a detonation on the Montgomery are the town and windows of Sheerness.
You basically are a professor and you blow up glass for a living.
How about if I say I break glass for a living?
I like it.
So what happens when a shock wave hits glass?
You should see the glass deflect inward, start back outward, and then shards start to fly as it fractures. If the glass breaks, glass flies everywhere, both inside and outside the building, and if you happen to be in proximity to that, you're very likely to get cut.
Okay, now I've been close to bombs, and I've felt just that wave come through the air. Sometimes it can actually hurt.
Scott explains the shock wave is so big it would be transmitted through the ground itself, almost like an earthquake.
I would expect more of your damage to occur from the ground wave breaking foundations and wiggling buildings than I would from glass damage with the bomb going off underwater.
Above ground, the key factors that determine the nature of the shockwave damage are distance and pressure. How much force is exerted and for how long?
This 5-pound charge represents a minuscule portion of the explosives on board the Montgomery. We're going to detonate this in order to demonstrate the effects of blast on glass.
We've set up a test where window panes are placed different distances apart. But how does each react to the same charge?
Wow.
Wow.
Wow, both of them.
There you go, yeah.
So there's as much on the outside as there is on the inside.
There may even be more.
Now, why did this one in this frame break and that one not?
A lot more pressure here.
A lot more pressure because...
You're closer to the bomb.
So that proves distance is a crucial factor. Just a few yards could make the difference between a house remaining untouched and all its windows blowing out. So now we know the Montgomery contains over 1,400 tons of high explosives. It's all live, But how could it affect the thousands of people living nearby? Coming up, the nightmare scenario. What happens if the Montgomery explodes? You are watching Time Bomb on the History Channel. This is our time bomb. The SS Richard Montgomery, a corroding American Liberty ship from World War II. Her 3 forward holds contain over 10,000 live munitions with massive destructive power.
An explosion could be triggered by an accidental collision, deliberate action, or even an attempt at bomb disposal.
3, 2, 1, fire.
Canada, 1958. The largest non-nuclear blast in North America destroys a submerged mountain that obstructed shipping. It pulverizes nearly 400,000 tons of rock and creates a 1,000-foot shaft of water. And they used 1,400 tons of TNT to do it, the same amount as on the Montgomery. Her bombs have been decaying for decades and are vulnerable to even slight impact from whatever cause.
In 1970, British scientists conducted a study to assess the potential damage of the Montgomery exploding. They used 2 key criteria: all 1,400 tons exploding at once, and that occurring at low tide. Basically, their worst-case scenario.
In a unique simulation for this program, leading U.S. blast scientists have combined the same criteria with cutting-edge know-how to model this explosion. The data gathered from field and scale tests determine the parameters.
Then a supercomputer predicts the effects of the Montgomery if she were to ever have a mass explosion.
They input the total quantity of explosives. The environment would play a huge role, so they add in the water depth, the nature of the clay seabed, and conditions on an overcast day. Their computer predicts a devastating explosion over a huge area. Windows could shatter as far as 9 miles away, bringing over 250,000 people into the danger zone. Combining this unique computer modeling with the existing British data and a report released to this program, we can show you what could happen if the Montgomery exploded. Our hypothesis starts with a collision. Say one of the many passing vessels hits the wreck. Within a few fractions of a second, it would be vaporized. Completely destroying anything up to 500 feet away.
The scale of the explosion would be so large, just to survey it, we need an aerial recon.
Our analysis predicts thousands of tons of water thrown towards the heavens.
Up here, if the Montgomery blew, I wouldn't stand a chance. It would shoot up a shaft of water and debris, and it would decimate this chopper or any other aircraft.
The British assessment estimates that a 1,000-foot wide shaft of water and debris would reach up to 10,000 feet, 8 times the height of the Empire State Building.
A shockwave would pass through the elements, through the water, through the ground, and through the air.
On the ground, seismic damage could be caused up to 2.65 miles away as an earthquake shakes buildings to their foundations. In the air, the thick cloud cover would make the situation worse, reflecting the blast back to Earth. On the water, the surf is turned into a tidal wave.
Out on the Thames, things will get hectic as British assessments predict a tidal wave of 14 foot. That's as high as this wall. That would capsize any small boat.
The supersonic shock wave then hits the beach and smashes into the town.
Within less than a second, that'll be all over, and then the real trouble begins as the environment, the buildings, and the people all start to react to the shock wave.
But what does that mean in practical terms? Jonathan Haynes has also modeled this explosion for us.
I'm just under 2 miles from the wreck. Jonathan, right after an explosion, what would happen to me right here?
The most obvious one is going to be a wave that's going to rush in. That's going to be about chest high. It's going to be a blast wave rushing across the sea. Now that's probably going to feel like something's hitting you in the chest with about 4 inches of concrete. It's probably going to knock you right on your back.
The American computer simulation predicts the shock wave would shatter 40% of the windows here along the Sheerness shoreline.
This is the closest residential street, just over 2 miles. What would happen right here?
Well, that blast wave from the sea is going to roll straight down here, and we're going to see lots of broken glass, particularly old single glazed windows. At least a quarter of the glass in this street is probably going to break. You're going to feel the ground move.
Downtown, 30% of the windows could fracture.
So we're still going to be seeing problems with big glass windows like this breaking, things come off the roof like chimney pots and slates. Even though we're that bit further away from the wreck, it's still going to be a problem for pedestrians in the street.
Most dangerous are the thousands of white phosphorus bombs. If that deadly chemical hits the air, it'll burn through anything.
The assessments say the power plant and natural gas refinery would probably escape unscathed, but any shrapnel could be thrown well over 2 miles, right into Sheerness. Any dispelled white phosphorus bombs would start fires and unleash a toxic cloud. The costs would run into billions of dollars. Can anything stop this time bomb from going off? You are watching Time Bomb on the History Channel. Our investigation has unearthed a wreck full of live munitions and revealed it could explode with devastating consequences. But what can be done to remove this threat from these people? First, you have to assess the bombs and determine their condition. That's never been done. We know some are probably fused, but where are they? And can they be defused? Even finding those answers could set off an explosion, so you'd have to evacuate thousands of people. Usually, whenever suspected munitions are discovered in British waters, action is taken at once by the Royal Navy's elite bomb disposal divers.
You guys are basically the pointy edge of dealing with underwater bombs. In general, how do you do that?
You would never try and defuse World War II ordnance. It could be too unstable, so if it's safe to blow where it is, that's your preferred option. If that's not possible because of where it is, it could be in a busy shipping lane, it could be close to shore, then we'll have to move it to a safer place, and then we consider our disposal option.
Here at the Royal Navy training area, the disposal team demonstrates how to deal with suspected underwater ordnance. They deploy just one diver, Andy. Knowing his presence close to the explosives could set them off, Andy works quickly and carefully in the poor visibility to make an assessment and determine if they're still live.
Okay, Andy, then can you confirm that was Ordnance?
Yeah, it's definite Ordnance. That's a British buoyant mine, World War II.
Okay, could you just do me a quick drawing on there?
He identifies a highly dangerous type of old mine. Deployed to protect ports and block shipping lanes, their explosive payload could easily damage nearby houses, and so it has to be moved a mile away. For the Montgomery's huge payload, everything for at least 2.5 miles would need to be evacuated. But even moving a single mine is a risky operation. First, they deploy a specialist lifting bag. It's attached with great care and set to inflate.
You're looking at approximately 4 hours to lift it and to move it about 3 miles. So realistically, I would say you'd probably do about 3 in a day.
So unloading the Montgomery by this method would take over 10 years.
We don't know the state of the actual mine, so there is always a chance that any sudden movement could set it off.
If all goes well, the bag slowly inflates, lifting the mine. When the balloon reaches the surface, the ordnance suspended below can be towed several miles to safety. Then it's carefully lowered and rigged with a charge. Clearly, an exception is being made for the Montgomery. The bombs are there and live, but still nothing is being done. Partly that's because all of the solutions so far suggested come with a whole new host of problems. But can the Montgomery really just be left as it is?
Several decades have gone by now, and the problem has become a messy one. It has degenerated. We are ethically required to remove it as a threat to future generations.
Other disposal experts we've consulted agree with Sidney that something should be done.
What is the best way to attack this problem?
You could build a coffer dam round it. It would probably be a way of making it safer. It would improve visibility drastically, and probably in the long run cheaper. The munitions would then be taken out one by one, taken to a safe place and disposed of individually.
So perhaps this cofferdam idea